Hey everyone, Steven here, and today I'm reviewing the ROG XG27UCG, which offers a dual monitor mode for 4K 160Hz or 1080p at 320Hz. This is the first monitor I've reviewed with a feature like this, so there is a lot to cover here. Like all of my reviews, I'll cover the specs first before getting into the panel settings and my test results. After that, I'll talk about what I like, potentially don't like, and the gray area before wrapping the video up. With that being said, let's get into the specs. The ROG XG27UCG is a 27-inch IPS panel monitor with a dual mode offering 4K at 160Hz or 1080p at 320Hz, and for both of these you get the fast 1 millisecond gray-to-gray response time. This has a typical brightness of 350 nits, a peak brightness of 400 nits, a 1000:1 typical contrast ratio, and a 1,000,000:1 contrast ratio in HDR. This covers 95% of the DCI-P3 color space and 130% of the sRGB color space, and then this has true 10-bit color. For ports, this has one DP 1.4 with HBR3, one HDMI 2.1, one USB Type-C that can be used as a video input and also has 15 watts of power delivery, and last, this has a headphone jack. For physical adjustments, this can raise and lower 120 millimeters. This can swivel to the left and right 45 degrees. This can tilt 5 degrees forwards and 20 degrees backwards, and this can pivot 90 degrees in either direction. This is also VESA compatible with a 100mm by 100mm pattern if you wanted to mount this. Like the other monitors in the XG series, this has a 1/4 tripod socket on the top of the monitor arm, so you can mount any type of camera or anything like that on top of this. And this has notches on the base to let you know the amount of rotation that the monitor arm has done. And then on the base as well, you have a phone slot holder. This does differ from the other XG monitors I've reviewed a little bit though in terms of the design here, as the ROG logo on the back has RGB lighting on it, which looks really cool, and the color of this is slightly darker than some of the other models. This also comes in a white variation, which is awesome, so if that matches your build aesthetics more, you do have that option here. For certifications, this has flicker free, low blue light, VESA adaptive sync for the 160 and 320 Hz, VESA HDR 400, AMD FreeSync Premium, and FSC Mix. Inside of the box, you will get the monitor, ROG pouch with DP cable, power adapter, you have your quick start guide, ROG stickers, and warranty card, which all ROG monitors come with a 3-year warranty across the board, so you're always covered when it comes to purchasing a monitor from ROG. Shifting over to the menu buttons are on the back of the right hand side, and this has a really easy to use layout, with there being a single button to navigate the menu, and then you have a back button or close button, and then 2 shortcut buttons, and then the power button. The shortcut buttons you can change to various options that I will cover once I get to that portion of the main menu. Now looking at the main menu, you have the following tabs: gaming, image, color, input select, lighting effect, my favorite, and system setup. Starting in the gaming tab, you have the frame rate boost, which switches this over from the 4K 160Hz mode to the 1080p 320Hz mode. Then you have variable overdrive, variable refresh rate, extreme low motion blur setup, game plus, game visual, and shadow boost. For variable overdrive, this has 20 total steps to it compared to other monitors that I've used, which usually have 3 to 5. This is listed as a number where others may say low, medium, high, extreme, or some other variation of that. I did run the on-screen response time testing tool for this variable overdrive, and so I will showcase those results here in a little bit. Next, you have the variable refresh rate, which you can turn this on or off, and this does say that it supports FreeSync Premium and then Adaptive Sync. You also have the option, if you have an NVIDIA GPU, to enable G-Sync compatibility in the NVIDIA control panel. Next, you have the extreme low motion blur. In order to enable this, you will need to turn off variable refresh rate. Once you do turn that off and you have the extreme low motion blur turned on, you have the option to adjust the clarity level, which has 5 levels to it, as well as adjust the position, which has top, middle, and bottom. You also have extreme low motion blur sync, which this works specifically with consoles, so only with consoles can you enable this. One thing I do want to note here, you do have to turn off the auto low latency mode on the console for this to work. Across the board, the extreme low motion blur modes on the XG series monitors have been one of the best I've used, with a good amount of adjustments that make a very noticeable difference. Now this doesn't translate to the camera, as you're just going to see the strobing behind the screen itself, so you just see basically flickering. So I can't really showcase this to you guys, but it does look really good in person. The clarity level adjustments that you get here actually kind of adjust the brightness here. So as you're going from 1, which would be the brightest, towards 5, it does start to dim the monitor more and more, but you're getting that reduction in motion blur more with that. Here, if you were to run the UFO test, what you would see is it almost starts to translate over, and it's so good, it's so like refined and clear. It's almost like there's a little bit of pixelation around that, but it's just reduced any motion blur. Very interesting to see, but again, it's very hard to translate that over to camera here because I'm going to get the strobing. And you get to also adjust the clarity position, where you can focus the effort towards the lower portion, middle, or upper portion of the monitor, and that in person, as you actually see that adjustment, is really crazy to see just because of how apparent it is. But kudos to ROG, because this is the best application with these monitors for extreme low motion blur that I've seen. It's actually one that I would use, where other monitors, it may be there, but they don't really improve performance to the degree that I would want, or the trade-off is if you do get an improvement, it dims the monitor so much it almost feels unusable. Here you get to scale adjust this to your liking and find that perfect sweet spot for what you want when it comes to the extreme low motion blur mode. After that, you have the Game Plus tab, which has the FPS counter, crosshair, timer, stopwatch, and display alignment. There are some cool things that you can adjust with the FPS counter and crosshair specifically, but I won't cover all of those. The one thing I do want to mention though is the crosshair. It has an AI feature. So looking at this image from ROG, it says with AI powered Game Plus technology, the monitor analyzes the scene on screen in real time and adjusts the Game Plus crosshair to enhance targeting accuracy. Additionally, dynamic shadow boost brightens dark areas without overexposing bright areas, providing a clear advantage in low light environments. After that, you have the Game Visual tab, which has all the picture presets. Here you have scenery, racing, cinema, RTS/RPG, FPS, sRGB, MOBA, night vision, and user mode. You get to keep all the image and color adjustments with any of these modes, which isn't always the case when it comes to monitors. I like the fact that they're allowing for this level of customization, because when a monitor doesn't allow that, they kind of box you into their preset with little to no adjustments, which means you'll need to adjust the settings to your liking through typically a user mode, which means more time spent trying to just get this to look the way you want it in the panel menu, where here you may not need to do any adjustments, but let's say you pick one of these presets, it may be a really good starting point with minor adjustments needed to it to get it exactly where you want it. After this, you have the shadow boost, which also isn't available in the sRGB preset, but it is there for all of the other ones. This has dynamic adjustment, 3 levels, and then off. Next, you have the image tab, which has a brightness, contrast, vivid pixel, HDR settings, ASUS Smart Contrast Ratio, aspect control, and blue light filter. For vivid pixel, this scales from 1 to 100 and enhances outline, sharpness, and color saturation of images and videos. For HDR settings, this has 3 presets: game, cinema, and consoles. You also have the option to make the brightness adjustable, but it does say this will affect the HDR PQ curve, so keep that in mind. Last thing I'll cover here is the ASUS Smart Contrast Ratio, which you can turn this on or off, and this does a really good job at adjusting the contrast ratio, but it won't be available in the sRGB preset. After that is the Color tab, which has display color space, color temperature, saturation, 6-axis saturation, and gamma. For display color space, you have sRGB, DCI P3, and wide gamut. This is on wide gamut for most of the gameplay footage in this video. Next you have color temperature, which this ranges from 4000K to 10,000K, or you can adjust the RGB settings in the user mode. I like this layout versus just saying like warm, cool, normal. You have a little bit more control over the variables here, or at least knowing specifically what value you are using in terms of color temperature versus, again, just using verbiage that says warm, normal, cool, something like that. After this, you have saturation, which goes from 0 to 100%. The ACS version, I actually had to turn saturation down from 50 to 40 because it was easily oversaturated. Here we have a finer balance with saturation, and out of the box, it looks really good. Then you have 6-axis saturation, which allows you to adjust the RGB and CMY color values for more control over the picture. Last, you have gamma, which normally I find can have like 3 or 4 options, but here you have 5 ranging from 1.8 to 2.6. Next, you have the input select tab, pretty self-explanatory, and then you have your lighting effects tab. Here you have Aura Sync, so if you are running Aura Sync with other peripherals or components that you may have, you can sync all of that up with the monitor here. And then you have Aura RGB. Here, you can turn this off, but then you have 5 modes: rainbow, color cycle, static, breathing, and strobing. For those that actually allow you to choose colors, you have RGB CMY here. Next, you have the My Favorite tab. Here you will have shortcut and customized settings. So the shortcut is going to change the 2 shortcut buttons that I mentioned earlier that are a part of the menu buttons. Here you have Game Plus, Game Visual, Frame Rate Boost, which it's on that by default, Variable Overdrive, Brightness, Mute, Shadow Boost, Contrast, Input Select, HDR Setting, Blue Light Filter, Color Temperature, Volume, Customize Setting 1, Customize Setting 2. And then you have your Customize Setting tab here, where you have 2 different settings that you can essentially save whatever adjustments that you've made to the panel in these 2 slots. And then last here we have the System Setup tab. Here you have Language, Sound, Power Indicator, Power Key Lock, Power Setting, OSD Setup, Display Port Stream, Information, and All Reset. So now that I've covered the specs and the in-panel menu options, I want to get into the Display Widget app. Alright, so this is the Display Widget Center here. Over here we have our main tabs: Game Visual, Game Plus, Multiscreen, Hotkey, App Tweaker, and then System Settings. If you're seeing that the look of this is changing because I don't know how well that translates to recordings, it's because right now for the Game Visual mode, I'm using the AI Visual, which is in beta mode right now. So what this does, very unique here, is it's actually going to, based off the content that it's picking up on screen, if you click any of these boxes and you say, hey, I want you to actually switch over to this different mode, it will do that for you. Very cool, because now if you have this enabled, you don't have to mess with changing presets. Once it picks up that that thing is on screen, let's say an FPS for example, it will automatically shift this over to that FPS preset for you. You don't have to change anything. Really cool. Now here, this is the AI visual window. This is letting me know, hey, what percentage of stuff is on screen right now. So here it kind of gives you the breakdown of why it would decide to choose a particular preset based off the percentages. And now we'll shift over. So we have RTS/RPG. I won't cover all of these because the breakdown is going to be the same, but here we have image and color. Image, you're going to get the brightness, contrast, variable overdrive, no blue light filter, shadow boost, the ASUS Smart Contrast Ratio. Then we have saturation, color temperature. So based off these things, you can adjust this and then save it for that preset. Game Plus, we're going to have crosshair, timer, FPS counter, and then display alignment. And then once you're on any of those tabs, you get to choose the various options there. So instead of going into the panel menu, you could use this for more ease of use. Multi-screen, if you do want to set this up for multiple screens on the monitor itself. Hotkeys, if you want to essentially set up any of these where it just makes it even quicker. You don't even have to necessarily always come back to the app. You could just hotkey it. App tweaker. So in previous videos, I've mentioned like I couldn't find the games here. There is a way to actually enable this for games. So let's say we don't want to do the AI through the game visual here. You can have it so that when a particular app or game gets pulled up, the mode shifts over to the preset that you want. So another way that you can do that, which is really nice, and it's just cool to have that feature where you don't have to, again, spend more time in the panel. You have everything essentially automated. So once you shift over from this to, let's say, an app that we're not going to be playing Red Dead Redemption, we're over in Premiere Pro, it'll shift then to a different mode if you want it to. And then we have our system settings, device info, application settings, and then user manual. So this has been the display widget center. Shifting over now to my test results with the on-screen response time testing tool. Here I did 0, 5, 10, 15, and 20 for the overdrive modes. I didn't do all 20, I did them in the 5 chunk increments here. This one is at 0. Here, looking at perceived response time, you can see, generally speaking, we're somewhere in the 5s when it comes to the average completion time here. So 5 milliseconds is what we're looking at with that. But we have 0 RGB overshoot, which would be any type of inverse ghosting that you might see. The visual response rating is rating all these information. So it's taking the perceived response time, the RGB overshoot, and then it's rating it on a scale of 0 to 100. So about a 5 millisecond completion time, like I said here. When you're looking at the 02550, that is going to be the black to white to black transition, and with that we had about 14 milliseconds. Shifting over to 5, this is where we start to see one of the interesting things with all of the XG monitors, because I've done the same testing scheme with all of the other ones that I've reviewed, and you do see an actual difference every time you make an adjustment with the overdrive. Doing them in the 5 increment chunks is where it is more noticeable, but the monitor does get faster as you increase overdrive. So you're getting this faster monitor, but you're gonna see here as I get towards 15 and 20, at a certain point that does come with a expense, which is the RGB overshoot or the inverse ghosting. Here though, I am getting a big drop in terms of the visual response rating at the 204. I ran this test multiple times and it popped up in different areas, so I'm not quite sure what is causing that. And this is where I do like to point out I am limited by this testing tool, and I know that ROG is going to have much better testing tools in-house that they're using to test all of their monitors. The thing I'm looking for here is, one, giving a different comparison with the testing tool that I'm using, and then trying to somewhat confirm, are we getting, for an example with this, are we getting a change as we adjust overdrive? And here we are for sure, but also are we getting the 1 millisecond gray to gray response time, and looking, can I somewhat confirm that? So the big thing here is we have 0 RGB overshoot, so no inverse ghosting still here, and then the average complete time is 4.19 milliseconds, where on 0 it was 5.3 milliseconds. So again, we are getting faster with the response time. Looking at 10 here, you're starting to see some numbers pop up on the RGB overshoots, but if I'm running a UFO test, it's not anything I actually visually notice here. In terms of getting faster, for the completion time, it is 5.06 now. So it actually started to slow down a little bit, but average perceived time and average initial time did speed up a little bit. Visual response rating, I'm still getting some of these numbers popping up where it's actually giving me a lower rating. But again, that may be a limitation of the testing tool, as that's actually, if you looked at perceived response time, 2 of the faster results that I got there. Shifting over now to 15, this is where we start to see certain things break down, but I'm also not getting any lower marks on the visual response rating, which is interesting. But we do have more noticeable inverse ghosting at this point. But we do have a very nice increase in speed here, response time. So your average complete time now is 3.72. This is the fastest so far, milliseconds. So we're getting faster initial and perceived time, and then we get that really good complete time. So again, this is getting faster. The overdrive here does work very well. And with this, I would say you kind of find the sweet spot for you. You have these 20 different options when it comes to this, and you can find kind of the one area where you're seeing minimal ghosting, minimal inverse ghosting, but you're also getting the fastest response time that you can see. And last, we have 20, and this is where you're going to see a big breakdown when it comes to RGB overshoot. You will have a lot of very noticeable inverse ghosting. Looking at the average complete time, 3.96, so we didn't get way faster. We did for the average initial time, but complete time is about the same. So you're really still getting the same result in terms of response time, roughly 3, close to 4 milliseconds on the response time, but you're really now trading that out for this inverse ghosting. Like I said, that is going to be very noticeable. Still getting one of the marks on the visual response rating that is pretty low, that is affecting the chart there a little bit, but shifting over, it's one of the faster areas that you find the perceived response time. So here, I'm getting similar results to the other XG monitors that I've reviewed, in the sense that every level that you have with overdrive is impacting the response time, the performance with this monitor. Here, with all the other ones, you have to find your sweet spot. The sweet spot with the other ones seemed to be closer to 10, where here it seems to be closer to 15, which is pretty interesting. 15 is where we got the faster response time, but still maintained very minimal RGB overshoot or inverse ghosting. So I think with this, that's probably going to be 13, 14, 15, maybe 16 is a really good zone to try and find, or at least start with on the overdrive, to see if that's going to be the optimal performance for you. And kudos to ROG here with the XG series, because here you're not just getting the same like overdrive settings that you may find on another monitor, where it may be like off, low, medium, high, something like that, right? Where you get maybe 3, maybe 4. Here you have 20 levels to this. So again, more customization, which I think is one of the big draws with the XG series, is there is so much customization that they have packed into this monitor, and this is going to be one of those areas. Now this of course does have this dual mode, so I did test this as well. So this is 1080p 320 Hz. In the top left hand corner we have 0 for the overdrive. Looking at the average complete time, we're actually getting a worse complete time now. So we're getting 14.23 milliseconds. The best there was 3.8, but when we're looking at that average, it is a lot higher, almost triple compared to the 4K 160 Hz. We are still getting 0 RGB overshoot though, so no inverse ghosting. To the right of that is going to be the overdrive of 5. We don't see a huge increase in average complete time. It went from the 14.23 now to the 13.7, still getting no RGB overshoot, so it is getting a little bit faster. It's really as we're progressing towards 15 that we're going to see the best results here, but we go from that, when we shift over to the overdrive of 10, we go to 12.3 for the average complete time. Again, we're not seeing any RGB overshoot here, so no inverse ghosting. So it's still following the trend of the 4K 160, which is effectively getting faster as you increase overdrive with this. And once you get into the teens, you slowly start to see the numbers pop up on the RGB overshoot. So in the bottom right hand corner, we have 15 for the overdrive. Here, couple numbers on the RGB overshoot. That's not anything that would actually visibly show up on a UFO test, for example. You're not going to see inverse ghosting on that. And 15 seems to be the really good sweet spot with the 320 Hertz here. The average complete time is 10.75 milliseconds, so it's not going to be as fast again as the 4K 160. Which that had an average complete time of 3.72 milliseconds. So here we're seeing about 2.5 to 3 times the average complete time. So this is slower than the 4K 160. 4K 160 is just faster in terms of the average complete time, the response time here. but you're doubling the refresh rate. So it's not anything that you're noticing now, a huge increase in ghosting or black smear or anything like that. It's still incredibly smooth because of that massive increase in the FPS. With that being said though, this is still slower compared to the 4K 160. So if you are a highly competitive player and you do need the most advantage in a game, the average complete time, the response time here may be too slow for you, something I would want to keep in mind. I'm not that type of player, so to me, I'm not noticing, again, any ghosting, black trailing, anything like that that is incredibly pronounced. Is it there? Yeah, it's very subtle though. If I'm a highly competitive player, I'm probably going to notice that a lot more, and it may be something where this just isn't quite as fast as I need it to be, especially if you're comparing it to something else like an OLED that is going to be like sub 1 millisecond on the response time. Now I couldn't cram all the results together. This is going to be the overdrive of 20. You start to see the RGB overshoot increases, so you will have very noticeable inverse ghosting at this point. And then the average complete time actually went back up. So now we went from the 10 milliseconds to 13 milliseconds. So you're starting to get slower. So the trade-off here isn't going to be worth it. 15 for both 4K 160 and 1080p 320 seems to be the really good sweet spot when it comes to overdrive. Shifting over now to my results from the SpiderX color calibration tool. Here I am showcasing color gamut. Now for the monitor, in terms of the tech specifications, they're using color space. Color gamut and color space are not the same thing. So here I'm just giving more information in regards to just color gamut, where they're just showcasing color space. So here for the wide gamut option, this covers 100% of the sRGB, 88% of the Adobe RGB, 94% of the DCI-P3, and then 84% of the NTSC. If you shift this over to the DCI-P3 color space mode, so you have 100% coverage of the sRGB, 87% of the Adobe RGB, 93% of the DCI-P3, and then 84% of the NTSC. And then last, we have sRGB. Here, 95% coverage of the sRGB, 71% of the Adobe RGB, 70% of the DCI-P3, and then 66% of the NTSC. And here I just want to define color gamut, color space, and then saturation really quick. I'm not going to read all of this, but here, color gamut, the range of colors that a system can display, reproduce, or capture. It's a 2D representation of the range of colors in a color space and can be thought of as the borders of that color space. Color space, a mathematical model that defines how colors are represented in terms of numbers. Each color space has a defined gamut, which refers to the specific range of colors it can represent. Saturation, a fully saturated color contains only a single wavelength and is considered the purest form of the color. Maintaining color saturation may come at the expense of changes in hue and lightness, which can be unacceptable for photo reproduction but often acceptable for computer graphics. Next, a new section for videos, which is showcasing what you can do on consoles. So this is the PlayStation 5. Here we have 4K, 1440p, 1080p. You do have a variable refresh rate, HDR, and then you're going to get 60 to 120 hertz. Now, depending on the mode, you may get some of the extra hertz in between, like for 4K for instance, but you do have full support across the board because this does have the HDMI 2.1. On top of that, I'm going to scroll down here and just confirm we have VRR, but you also have the auto low latency mode. That is another question I get quite often. Here you will have this both for the PlayStation 5 and Xbox. Shifting over now to the Xbox, we actually can just confirm 4K 120 Hz. We have HDR. The only thing you're going to be missing here is Dolby Vision. With Dolby Vision, that's like a proprietary version of HDR. So it's really their calibration for HDR. Looking at the various modes here, you have the auto low latency mode here, and we do have the VRR. And then just noting again, you don't have Dolby Vision here, so you wouldn't be allowed to check that box off. VRR always on or just for games here. And then looking at the video fidelity and overscan, just confirming 10-bit color. So when we're using HDR, we do get that full 10-bit color. And as far as I know, again, this is true 10-bit, not 8-bit plus FRC. something I do want to showcase here. So this is going to be the PlayStation 5 HDR here. Very vibrant, looks really good. Shifting over to the Xbox Series X though, I did have some difficulties because it makes it extremely dark. Now, we're doing Call of Duty 6 here, and with this, it is extremely dark with no ability to adjust HDR in the game settings. So we actually had difficulty. It's me and my son playing, trying to see anything. That's how dark it is. So I've noticed, depending upon the game, like this one, if it doesn't have any features where you can adjust HDR, it may not be something that you can use with the Xbox Series X. Even if you do calibrate HDR, it just isn't going to look really good on this. And neither is the in-panel settings that you have for HDR either. So even if you're switching between like gaming, console, or cinema modes on this, it doesn't really affect the look of this that much. It's just so dark you just can't see anything. And now I want to transition over to some screenshots here. So this is SDR with no extreme low motion blur turned on. You can actually see really well, but as we turn on the ELMB mode, you will see it darkens. And so this to me is a really good in between. Now, if I showcase footage of this, you would see some like flickering that really isn't there just because you're getting the strobing effect. So it actually smooths everything out and speeds it up. But here is a comparison, the left to the right here. So you can see the difference between just pure SDR mode, no ELMB on, and then with ELMB turned on there. So now we're just looking at ELMB on right now, and then let's turn on HDR with that ELMB, and now you can see it gets to the point. It is extremely dark. It is very hard to see anything with that setting. Now, they don't allow you to adjust anything. Other games may, and I'm going to look at that here in a second, but if I'm looking at this right now, this is HDR on. Now, it's a different angle, and so I didn't get the same angle on this, but literally, like, you can't see. This is the same portion of the game, but now it's just SDR. You can see. I'm hoping maybe down the road they actually get you some adjustments for Call of Duty 6 on the Xbox Series X, so you can adjust the HDR like you can when you're playing Tomb Raider. Here you get those adjustments, and so that does change this a lot, because if you're playing with HDR on, it can be really dark still, but you have the ability to adjust it where you can take that and make it more playable. Or right now, Call of Duty 6 isn't like that. Some other games may be like that as well. So this is kind of just a precautionary warning to everybody. Just be mindful, this can be too dark for HDR. Certain games, it may be better to play in SDR if they don't allow for a lot of adjustments when it comes to that HDR experience. The glowing that you're seeing here, you actually don't see that in person, but this is an IPS panel, so you do get backlight glow a little bit. When we're looking at this now I can actually see everything. It is much clearer, but I do want to point out this is game dependent. I don't think this is anything wrong necessarily with the panel. I think this has to do with the game and the ability to adjust this in the game. But again, I didn't experience this on the PlayStation 5 with any games. It was just on the Xbox Series X. And I will say, in general, the games on the Xbox Series X with HDR are just overall darker by default than the PlayStation 5, which seemed to be a little bit more on the bright side and a little bit more vibrant. Alright, so now that I've covered the specs, the in-panel menu, my test results, console specific stuff, let's get into what I like, potentially don't like in the gray area. I am going to do this a little bit different because with these I found some combos here. So instead of doing separate sections, if there's something that maybe has a downside with it, I'm just going to talk about that all together. I'm also going to go through these things a little bit faster than normal and get to what I think is the main draw, which is what most people want to know about, which is the dual mode here, the 4K 160 or 1080p 320 Hz. Alright, so to start here, both modes look really good. Get that out of the way, but 4K 160 Hz here, it does look really good in person. You're getting the really good visuals here. Everything is vibrant, clear. It performs really, really well. You also get a lot of customization in regards to the picture itself with this that I showcased in the menu. HDR has a little bit. We get those 3 modes. I will pull up footage of me cycling through those really quick so you can see what the difference is. If There's a lot of color on screen. The only thing I'll notice is really, in this instance, when I'm playing Horizon Forbidden West, is the clouds in the background. That's what's changing there. So the whites are going to change. Everything else, really don't notice much change here. You can adjust the brightness if you do put this into that mode, but again, it will affect the PQ curve here. And it's already at max brightness with all of these, so I think what we're running into is a ceiling on the max nits that this can hit, which is affecting the picture a little bit. And then of course the stuff that I covered with the Xbox Series X, and certain games looking just so dark they were for the most part unplayable. Again, that can be dependent upon whether or not the game allows you to adjust HDR. So keep that in mind. That isn't just an issue that the panel is causing here. I think we have two things going on. We have something going on with the panel to some degree, but also if there's no adjustments in a game, it's not going to allow you to adjust HDR at all. That is going to be an issue as well. You can adjust the Xbox settings and clean that up just a little bit, but the PlayStation 5 didn't really have this same issue, but I also don't have really dark games to test on the PlayStation 5 compared to the Xbox Series X. You typically get better HDR with consoles from what I found by default with monitors. Here it was just the interesting mixture of it looked better on the PlayStation 5 while the Xbox Series X was much darker, especially when we were looking at the Call of Duty 6 gameplay where honestly you just couldn't see anything. Now shifting over to like the PC, no issues here because I get more adjustments both in the NVIDIA control panel or AMD control panel if you're using an AMD GPU, plus the game on top of that. They just offer more customization when it comes to HDR compared to consoles. Next, this has a solid response time with the overdrive settings here, offering a lot of various adjustments so you can get this right where you want it. Go back to the results. Again, you can speed this thing up at the expense of inverse ghosting, but because it gives you 20 different levels versus a lot of times you may see a monitor has 3 or 4 levels and they may be like fast, faster, extreme, or something like that. Here you get a lot more customization with this. Again, all of these having some subtle effect to them, but then they stack. So I went in those 5 increment chunks and you could see a lot larger change between them, but you can go on the in-betweens as well because you have 20 levels here. So you can get this right where you want it. You also have the really good extreme low motion blur modes here, both for the regular version and then the sync version that you can use with consoles. And with both PC and console, you get to change where the effort is being put, top, middle, bottom. But then on PC, you can actually adjust the 5 different levels of the ELMB mode. We get a lot of cool extras with this monitor. We're going to get the threading up on the top of the stand so you can mount a light, a camera, something like that there. We have the notches on the bottom ring around the neck itself so you can see how much of an adjustment you're making. And then we have the slot for your phone so you can put it there. Pair that with the USB Type-C here, where you're getting 15 watts of power. It's not enough to power a handheld or a laptop, but for your phone, it will work. Bonus there though is that the USB Type-C is used as an input as well. So using this with your phone, with a handheld, with a laptop, you can pair this there. Just keep in mind limitations with the handheld and the laptop in terms of power, but they still work really good here. I will say that that is one feature where I see some comments in regards to the USB Type-C input on my reviews of these XG monitors, the 15 watt limit. I think here it would have been nice to see 60 plus, 60 to 90, so you can power that handheld, especially if we were to look at the ROG Ally, for instance, pairing it with this, or a laptop. The workaround is obviously you just need some type of other power adapter in order to plug it in, which means more cables on your desk here. But 2 things you have to keep in mind here is going to be that will affect price. It will make it more expensive. And then usually with that, if they can't actually fit the power kind of brick inside of the panel itself, you will end up with an external power brick, which just takes up more space. Next, the text clarity looks good here in 4K, but you're going to have issues if you're dropping down to 1080p. I doubt people are switching this over to 1080p in order to write anything and use documents and use different apps like Premiere Pro or something like that. Really, it is for gaming. In 4K though, very crisp, very clear. And then last here, we do have the IPS panel glow that is with all IPS panel monitors. It does seem to be a little bit more pronounced in HDR with really dark games, but if you're getting any IPS panel, just expect that with really dark images, there may be the potential for that IPS panel glow there where you just see it illuminated. You will notice it less in a slightly brighter room, but if everything is really dark, that room is dark, the image is dark, it will be more pronounced across the board regardless of the brand. It's more to do with the fact that it is the IPS panel. So to recap, we have incredible visuals here, lots of customization for those visuals, lots of customization for the overdrive settings. We have the really good extreme low motion blur mode. We have cool extras with this. You have the lighting on the back that some of the other XG monitors doesn't have. We have the USB Type-C that you can use as an input. We are lacking the higher watt charging there, keeping that in mind. We have good text clarity in 4K. We do have some IPS panel glow here, but that is to be expected. Now, the big thing, the thing everybody is most likely looking at this for, 4K 160 or 1080p 320. It does look really good here in both modes. The ability to switch that, to go from the 4K and basically just double the hertz there if you wanted to play something much faster, I think is mainly going to be game dependent and obviously hardware dependent. Can your hardware even hit 320 hertz? Does the game allow for it? And the reason I bring that up is because I played Destiny 2 in both modes and there isn't a massive jump in performance when you're going from 4K 160 over to 1080p 320. So depends on where you're at, what you're doing. If you're in an area where there's really nothing going on, like I'm capping out about 200 in the 1080p, which if we're looking at 4K, I mean, I'm usually pretty consistently holding the 160 hertz. Now I am using a 4080 Super here, so keep that in mind in terms of hardware, and then I have a 7700X from AMD and 32 gigs of DDR5. With that being said, shifting over to 1080p 320, again, it's capping out at about 200 hertz, 200 FPS. I even dropped it down to 720p, like maybe that was gonna make a difference, and it didn't. I would still peak at 200. Now, shifting over to an area where it's very graphically demanding and I'm not actually getting a massive bump. 4K, I can range from like upper 90s all the way to like 130s in 4K pretty consistently. Dropping this down to the 1080p so I can do the 320, I'm like mid 150s to maybe 160s, and it drops even lower than that. So it has more to do with the game. I then even changed that down to 720p, thinking like maybe I'll get a bump there. Not really. So certain games, I would look into whether or not that may actually have an impact on if you can hit the 320 hertz. My assumption here is it's going to be people that want to play like CSGO, or they're playing Fortnite or something like that that can handle it. Because with those games, like I tested out Doom Eternal, immediately I could tell the difference. 4K 160, I can actually hit that and I can stay capped the whole time. Dropped it down to 1080p, I held 320 hertz for the most part the whole time, and there is a massive visual difference going from 160 to 320 with that. So here I think you're getting the best of both worlds. Like some games I want to play 4K 160 hertz, and there's not going to be a massive difference or upside to switching over to 320 hertz at 1080p, Destiny 2 for example. But other games, there is that massive improvement, like playing 4K 160 hertz Doom and then switching over to 1080p 320. I don't notice a massive drop in resolution. It's not as noticeable to me, but the increase in the frame rates, literally doubling, is very impactful. So you again get the best of both worlds. I can have that dual mode. I wish more monitors had this. I definitely think this is going to be the next thing to take off, and I'm seeing more come out. But you get, hey, there's certain things I want to play in 4K 160, but then there's other things, hey, I need more FPS here, but you may be stuck at the 160 with another monitor. Here you can double that FPS, you can squeeze more performance out, and the resolution isn't that big of a deal to you because you do want the higher refresh rate. And you may be surprised by some games. I actually tested out Halo Infinite. I thought that was going to struggle because usually I don't notice a massive improvement when I'm changing out resolution and refresh rates. Here, 1080p, the 320 hertz, I was 190 to 260, holding generally around 220 the whole time. With 4K 160, it was 110 to 130 is kind of the average block that I would see there. So we're effectively getting about another 100 FPS out of it, and the 1080p was visually a downgrade obviously, but not as much as I thought, because again, the trade out with the massive improvement or increase in FPS that it can display kind of even that out a little bit. And I'll take the performance when I'm playing those matches versus something that is higher in resolution. I'm not as concerned there with that. I want more FPS for a smoother experience. One thing to note here, no difference with 1440p. I think having the triple modes would be cool. Like maybe if we got like 160 for 4K, 240 for 1440p, and then 320 for 1080p, that would have been really awesome. But if you're doing 1440p, it's still going to be stuck at the 160 hertz. And another thing to note is the fact that you can't really take advantage of this dual mode with consoles. Shifting this over from 4K 160, which would be 4K 120 on a console, and then be like, well, let's do 1080p. It's not going to change anything because those are locked at 120 hertz there, so there is no difference. So if you just played on consoles, this isn't something that I would recommend. This is really geared towards PC players that, again, have certain games where they want to squeeze more performance out of that game, and they're okay with dropping down the resolution in order to get it. Now, of course, this does come with a performance hit. I showcased that with the results from the on-screen response time testing tool. How much of that do you notice though? So when you're going from 4K 160 to 1080p 320, because you're doubling the refresh rate there, it is effectively eliminating a lot of that ghosting. So although we are showing the response time is getting slower because you've doubled the refresh rate here, visually you're not noticing a lot of ghosting, inverse ghosting. You're not noticing any black trailing, anything like that. Again, the sweet spot from what I can see with these test results seems to be about 15 for the overdrive, where you're going to get the faster response time out of the monitor with very minimal inverse ghosting. So I don't think anybody is going to notice these things switching between modes. It's not something that it becomes extremely apparent now we have more ghosting or anything like that. Again, you're doubling the refresh rate, so it eliminates a lot of those things. So it almost seems comparable between the two modes in terms of ghosting or inverse ghosting. Just keep in mind the overdrive settings and the effect that that has on the response time. The last thing I want to cover here is the price. This is normally $499, so $500. I've seen this on sale for $430. I suspect with the holidays coming up, we may see that even a little bit lower potentially. I think across the board though, it has earned this price tag because of the high level of customization here and offering this really cool dual monitor mode that they have. And so for me, I'm trying to compare this to just other 4K, like 144 to 180 hertz monitors that are out there. And just the normal price tag with just that alone is pretty comparable to what else is out there. Adding in all the customization like I talked about, adding in the dual monitor mode, I think this gives this more value on top of the fact that they offer the 3-year warranty that not every company does. So you are covered here for 3 years, which I think that has to be factored into the cost because, again, you're covered much longer. A lot of times you may only find 1 year. Here you get the 3. I also like the fact that this comes in white. So if that does match your overall aesthetics of your build a lot better, you do have the option here where you don't find a lot of white monitors out there. So here you get the 2 options, which is really nice. So that's going to wrap this video up. I think ROG has delivered a really good monitor here with the XG27UCG, offering this dual mode that I've seen some other monitors out there are starting to offer, but I am hoping that this becomes more of a staple with gaming monitors because it just offers more versatility when it comes to what you want out of your gaming experience. And add on top of that, a big draw for this particular monitor is the fact that you do get so much customization when it comes to the panel settings. I do wish we had a little bit more in regards to HDR though, especially for console players, but I don't think that that is a deal breaker here. I do want to mention we don't get any extra USB ports or anything like that. That's something I would like to see some of these XG monitors have. This is more of like their mid-tier line where they're trying to bring a lot of the things that you see with the very high-end ROG monitors to the entry level and mid-tier space. So I do understand there are certain things that they're just not going to have here, but if we could squeeze in maybe some higher power for the USB Type-C port and maybe a couple extra USB ports, I think that would just take this to the next level here. It's really the only thing that I can think of here that may be missing outside of maybe speakers, but most people don't really use the built-in speakers on a monitor. They have really good external speakers or they're using a headset. So I don't think that that's something you necessarily need here with this monitor. So I think this is a huge home run for ROG, and I'm excited to see what we see down the road with more monitors offering these dual modes, hopefully even like a tri mode like I mentioned where we get some adjustments to 1440p as well. Well, that's going to be it for this one. If you guys want to pick this up, I will have a link for this in the description. Check back frequently because again, coming up on the holidays here, I think we're going to see some really good sales on these XG monitors, not just this one, all the XG monitors that they have in their lineup. If you guys have any questions about this, let me know in the comment section. I will make sure to answer that for you there. If you like the video, hit the like button for me as it helps the channel out. If you want to continue to follow along with all my content, hit the subscribe button for me. And as always, thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.